We've got a lot to unpack this week with the Michael Colucci hearing, and helping us break it all down is attorney Lauren Taylor, someone who knows her way around a courtroom and isn't afraid to speak about how the system works. Lauren runs Lauren Taylor Law in South Carolina. She handles everything from criminal law, family law. You do civil law too, right, Lauren?
We do personal injury, yes.
Okay,
so everything you need, and estate planning.
So it's kind of an all-purpose law firm. She's amazing. She's been keeping a close eye on some of the biggest legal bombshells this week, including the judge's decision to toss out the murder indictment against Michael Colucci. So, Lauren, you've been watching some of the state's most complex legal cases unfold, most notably the recent dramatic move by Circuit Court Judge Roger Young to quash the murder indictment against Michael Colucci, a Somerville jeweler accused of killing his wife in 2015. The judge dismissed the case this week without prejudice, and we'll talk about what that means. But he cited critical exculpatory evidence withheld by SLED and prosecutors, namely about Sarah Colucci's mental health struggles, her substance abuse use, and a specific suicidal statement she made to her mother just weeks before her death. So prosecutors allege that Colucci staged this hanging with a garden hose, but the defense says that these newly disclosed documents, which were disclosed just before trial was about to start, showed that Sarah had talked to her mother about hanging herself in the days before her death. And the defense attorneys, rightfully so, agreed that this information, or said that this information could have significantly influenced both the grand jury and the trial jury. And the judge agreed, and he found that the omission was a foul with harm, and ordered that the prosecution begin anew and bring this entire case in front of a grand jury again. So it was a really wild courtroom moment, but I guess let's start with the basics. So this motion was a motion to dismiss the indictment, and it was filed under Brady versus Maryland. And most people know this as that you hear the word Brady violation. So they were claiming that there was a Brady violation. So can you break down what that is and why it's such a serious issue in the justice system?
Absolutely. So Brady versus Maryland is one of the foundational cases that is like criminal law 101, we would say. So basically the point of Brady is, if the government is alleging that you have committed a certain number of offenses that violate the laws, then they have to be able to present all the evidence that they have involving the case, specifically exculpatory evidence, which is a fancy word for saying if there's any evidence that indicates that the person did not commit these crimes that the police or law enforcement have come across during the course of their investigation, they're still obligated to turn that evidence over, whether it's favorable to their argument and their case or whether it's unfavorable. So in this specific instance, I think the state was arguing that, there had already been things in the first trial that came out about Mrs. Colucci's mental health. It was certainly referenced in the beginning of the trial. So their argument is the more of the no harm, no foul. And I think that's what Judge Young was referencing. However, it is really important to know what the makeup of that first jury was, okay? From everything that my sources have told me, that there was a significant amount of the jurors that were voting already in the not guilty verdict. So with that evidence and, with the statement of Mrs. Moore, Sarah's mother, that could have very easily pushed any of those other jurors that were still, not convinced into a not guilty verdict, which, would have solved the case back then instead of, letting it drag out to today's current events. So that's one thing to consider too. Now, when Judge Young uses the words no harm, no foul, so when we're talking about prosecutorial misconduct here, a lot of things are going to happen. I think we've seen some things in the Murdaugh case that happened that were truly not Creighton Waters' fault. But nonetheless, they were still falling under that misconduct umbrella where we have to come back and analyze, was this conduct harmless? And if it was harmless, what was the reaction to it? So what Judge Young referenced in that statement was really that the pathologist, other expert witnesses no longer had the benefit of having this information fresh in their brains when they were investigating this case 10 years ago, with the information that Sarah had made statements to her mother that she was going to commit suicide, not just commit suicide, but by hanging, which of course was the method that the defense is claiming that was the inevitable result. So with that being said, I think it's important to say, that the experts didn't have the benefit of the doubt of having this information when they should have had it. So therefore, the argument is that this whole case has been flawed from the very beginning, right? That's why when he says he's dismissing it without prejudice, that means that the state is free to file again. He did encourage them to be much more specific in their grand jury filings, and to really think about this case before they put it forward. I do think that there were some things that happened on Tuesday. I was personally out of town and was getting ready to dive into this thinking we had a couple weeks to cover this trial. But I think some of the evidence and some of the witnesses that were called sped this along a little bit, let's say. Yeah, one of them being the former prosecutor.
Yeah, that was, the hearing was really interesting. The former prosecutor that was the lead prosecutor 10 years or when this was trialed originally in 2018 took the stand, and she was so combative with the defense. I mean, the judge even threatened to hold her in contempt.
I think you can even see the face of the prosecutor in the side view I was watching on court TV, and he is kind of like visibly uncomfortable with the exchange. I don't know if she had a bad day, if her child was sick the night before. I would love to give her all of the grace in the world, but that was a very shocking performance that she put on, and it certainly did not bode well for the Attorney General's office. It certainly did not bode well for her professionalism amongst the bar. I think that would definitely have taken a hit just by, I think the first question asked was her name, and it was right from there.
It was right from the get-go.
And Judge Young was very quick to, I think if I had ever been in a position where a judge had threatened to hold me in contempt of court, I would have immediately changed my tune and kind of recoiled that back. But it was an interesting strategy on her part. And, I think when you try these cases, people get so emotionally involved. It becomes part of your life, right? Whether you're a defense attorney or prosecution, when you're coming home at night, you're talking to your spouse about it, you're thinking about it every minute of the day, new things are coming. So you do get attached to it. And of course, she wants to defend her office and all the hard work that they did put into putting this case together. But at the end of the day, this isn't a situation where there's a murderer that is on the loose, possibly. If it is not Mr. Colucci, then it is, in fact, Mrs. Colucci committed suicide.
Right.
So I think that is a different perspective to something like Alex Murdaugh, where if it wasn't Alex Murdaugh, Paul and Maggie Murdaugh did not commit suicide. There is another person on the loose that could be a threat to the public. And so, that also adds another layer to, are you putting an innocent man in prison, not just an innocent man, but a man that there was no crime ever committed?
Right.
And I think that plays a little bit differently into Judge Young's assessment of it too, because you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you can't get there and you were playing with some tricks, then you're certainly not going to get there when the rules are being upheld. So I think what he did yesterday was absolutely necessary for the state of South Carolina to rebuild our reputation nationally, that, we've had a lot of things happen in our court system down here that is kind of a black eye on our state. So anytime you see someone in a position like his that is, chastising the state and saying, we hold you as a community to a better standard and we demand more from you, I think that helps quell the public's general distrust of the legal system in the state right now.
Right. And, it's been 10 years. Going back to that testimony, it's a long time for people to, remember things. And her mother had to take the stand and kind of recall her conversation with the lead investigator. And it was interesting, what she recalled and what she didn't recall. She couldn't remember if David Owen had taken notes, but she remembered
grape Kool-Aid.
Right.
She
remembered that her husband had served him grape Kool-Aid. It was really interesting that it has been this long, and people, memories fade. Her father has since died. It's just an interesting dynamic, and watching.
It's always hard to get justice the longer cases drag on. You have witnesses that have passed away. You have experts that have passed away or are no longer available. So it's already a difficult case for the state just because of the time that has elapsed since the incident to now. But now with the withholding of the evidence, and what I thought was actually interesting and a good move by the defense was to put up Miss Moore's testimony from the previous trial, and to really go into the analysis of the former prosecutor's cross-examination, or I'm sorry, direct testimony, direct questioning of her. So that was really interesting to me because, the prosecutor's argument that she was really just trying to tailor her questions to prevent a hearsay objection, I think that was false, and it was really powerful to bring back the video and see how many times she kept saying, no, don't say what she said, don't say what she said. And it was a tight line for her to have to answer. And the judge knows better than anyone how to read through that and what intentionality or lack of intentionality might have been in her intentional questions.
I always find it interesting watching attorneys during trial. They're always kind of walking that line when they're questioning witnesses. And that's why, people are always like, well, why didn't they ask them that? I'm like, well, this is why, that could have drawn a hearsay.
It absolutely is. And as far as her memory, it is interesting that over the time period, she was the mother of the victim. So people would think that, she either would believe that her daughter committed suicide or she would believe that Stephen Colucci murdered her. And those things, I think, get a little hazy in her testimony. But I think at the end of the day, the prosecutor did herself no favors by how she answered the defense attorney's questions. It certainly seemed as though she was being a little bit combative, had a defensive attitude as far as what her intent was behind those things. And Kenley and I actually went to law school together, and I think she did an amazing job on behalf of the Attorney General's office. She obviously inherited this case. So, she did the best she could with what she had, and she even preserved the record even further by adding in another additional text message. So I think, not every person in the Attorney General's office is to blame here. I think it's kind of an unfortunate situation, but I do think it's really relevant that a lot of these people are involved in the same cases. And that's an issue that we really need to take an introspective look through SLED, through our judicial system, and see why do we keep seeing the same names in problematic situations within the South Carolina legal system.
Right, because, SLED agent David Owen was also the lead investigator on the Murdaugh case. When he took the stand during the trial, there were a lot of questions about what he presented to the grand jury. And did he lie to the grand jury in that? I think that really, the state had a strong case. It was circumstantial, but they did have a strong case. But I do think that was a moment during the trial where their case didn't seem nearly as strong as people thought it was.
I would agree. And I think you have to have these people that are investigating these crimes. They have to walk and operate with the utmost level of integrity, because if it's not from the very beginning, the prosecutors are standing there with one leg, or one arm. They don't know everything. They're relying on the facts that these officers provide to them. So if we have a problem in the investigative unit in our state and these officers are not able to fully and unbiasedly conduct investigations, then of course our Attorney General's office is going to be handicapped every step of the way, because they're not getting the correct information that they need to make these decisions on who they indict and who they prosecute. So it's a ground up issue, it appears to be, the more we keep seeing these same names appear.
Right. And, in terms of how, so when you're a defense attorney and you get this, get discovery handed over to you, um, that's a lot to go through, right?
Absolutely. It's in, Andy Savage's office has had this file. I can't imagine how big it is. I'm sure it takes up at least a room or two in his office. So you're constantly having it updated, right? Like as new things are presented to you. So this should have been caught, especially, with it being the person that it was, the mother of the victim. You would think that this information would have been discovered before now, but 10 years is a really, really long time to not fully turn over your file. You can supplement every single week if you need to, but to not provide that evidence to the defense when the crux of the defense is that she committed suicide, it certainly doesn't come from a clean hands approach from the state.
Right. So speaking of Murdaugh, do you expect his legal team to seize on this ruling in Colucci to bolster their argument for prosecutorial or investigative misconduct in their appeal?
I mean, I wouldn't put anything past Dick and Jim. I think they're great lawyers and they're really creative with language, and they take every opportunity that they can to like add another brick in the wall that they're building. I think that it's still the strongest issue with Murdaugh is obviously Becky Hill and her direct infiltration with the jurors there. But it doesn't look good.
Right.
And I think everyone is just really tired of our judicial system having another issue. Like, we need to be out of the news. We need to not be the state that is famous for, messing up murder trials or, not getting things across the line and playing by the book. So I think that is certainly going to be on the Supreme Court's mind when they're, contemplating this appeal. Is it something that they take a Judge Young's perspective, where he even said, look, if they had presented this evidence and we had ruled on it properly in a motion in limine at the first trial, and I had allowed it in, it would have probably still survived an appeal. Okay. But he is the judge now. So he said the buck stops here. I am not okay with that. I am not letting that go forward. With more justices that take that type of approach, then yeah, the Supreme Court could say, look, it wasn't easy. We still think he did it, but we need to retry this case to procedurally, protect the things that we hold dear in this country and our constitutional rights and our freedoms. We cannot let elected or state employees, put their hands into investigations and act outside of the scope of their duties. Those people need to be held responsible, and we do need to make sure that justice is done properly, as much as it's annoying and costly, unfortunately.
Do you anticipate them bringing this to a grand jury again to try to get another indictment? Do you think?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I would really hope not. But it would also be, I don't know, the Attorney General doesn't want any more mud on its face. And to not do it would almost be admitting that they didn't believe that they had enough evidence to really prosecute the case in the first part. So I would think that, yeah, they probably will. Now, whether it gets through a grand jury is another issue. But I don't think that, the Attorney General's office is just going to say, oh, shucks, they had binders. They were ready to try a murder trial this week. They're going to follow through with it, I think.
So Michael Colucci, he, for 10 years, or since his arrest, I think his arrest was 9 years ago, he has had an ankle monitor on. He's been under strict bond conditions for 9 years. And he, after the trial, or after the hearing, came out and spoke to the media, and they took his ankle monitor off. The judge said he's, until you indict him again, he is a free man. But he mentioned he had neuropathy in his ankle from having that on so long. I mean, does he have a case civilly?
So I think he did mention that, and he would have to prove harm.
Right.
The neuropathy would be that. And then, if he had asked for them to readjust it or get him a different one that would maybe not cause the neuropathy, certainly he's racked up, I think $25,000, they said, in fees for this electronic ankle monitoring. So I know that is substantial, but unfortunately, that's just kind of how things go. But let's see what happens. We'll see what the grand jury decides to do. It might be they might be weighing the options of saying, is he going to sue us civilly? And if we can't get it past a grand jury, does that bolster his civil claim of malicious prosecution? Maybe. So it's going to be a little strategic in what Andy Savage decides to do going forward, and it might derail them potentially submitting it to the grand jury. We'll see.
Interesting. Okay. So this wasn't the only high profile case this week that came to a conclusion that there was a lot of alleged, misconduct in the Karen Reed trial. After I think it was 6 weeks of testimony, finally went to a jury. I think they deliberated 21 hours.
I thought it was a long time. Well, not, certainly we've had longer verdict deliberations, but this has been the case that the country has been watching. I think if anyone was watching the live verdict that was read yesterday, you could hear the audible cheers of her supporters outside the courtroom, inside the courtroom. This is a case that everyone has been following. I think what is different, from Colucci and Karen Reed is that Karen Reed is now innocent. Okay, she can now be retried for this case. She was convicted of driving under the influence and was sentenced to 1 year probation for that, which is what every first offender in that state usually receives. So the judge, I know she's not everyone's favorite. She did go along with that normal sentencing recommendation for that. But now we do have a question. Who killed John O'Keefe?
Right.
What is the state going to do now? And I've seen a lot of her protesters or a lot of her fans that have changed their rallying call to justice for John. We need to know, again, if there are police officers who have taken an oath to serve and protect, and they are actively involved in either the death itself, certainly in the mismanagement of the investigation, and certainly in some form of cover up, then those people need to be held to account. And we need to find out what happened to him.
Right.
Karen Reed is now no longer a person that can be considered in this. So, let's see if the state is aggressively pushing for justice now that it's not on a suspect that they really like it to be on. I would like the same aggression to come forward to some of these witnesses and some of these members that were in that house that night and really see what happened, because if it wasn't her, it was them.
Right.
So we have to get to the bottom of it, and we'll see. I think in Massachusetts, particularly, the environment there is different than it is in South Carolina. People have a general distrust for law enforcement. This case has sparked a lot of internal outrage. And so I think the community is going to be holding them to account more so than we do here in South Carolina. And I mean, we do a great job, but they're just a little bit more outraged up there at what's happening. Because, this was a police officer and he was murdered.
He was.
We need to find out.
He didn't fall in the snow. He was murdered.
Exactly.
That has been an interesting case to follow. Even from the OUI charge was added by the defense, which I thought was really interesting.
So that was strategic on their part, because you want to give the jury something, okay? Like, they know that she was not a perfect angel that night, okay? We know she got in a car. We know what her blood alcohol level was. So he is basically like saying, okay, you got to get her for something, get her for this. Feel guilty or feel great about checking that little guilty box, and then let's move on with our lives, because we know that she did not do the crux of this case. So I think it was a brilliant move. Her defense team should truly be studied, like in law school for years to come, how brilliant they were. And she said it yesterday as she was leaving the courthouse, that no one has fought harder for John O'Keefe than her and her defense team. And I unequivocally believe that's true. They have discovered so much corruption and evidence that it would have never come up if she had had a public defender or, someone else. Like, they truly are amazing, amazing jurists. And I think, law students should all be watching this trial and taking notes for how they advocated for their client, how they handled a judge that consistently ruled against them, and still were able to maintain favor with this jury and, credibility. It was truly, truly masterful. And, they her about their client. They were in tears when the verdict was read as well. And, it's crazy to think that I think it's been 4 years since she has been able to like lay her head down at night and know that she's not going to prison.
I can't even, I can't imagine the weight of that, and then I also look at, like Sarah Colucci's daughter, who was a child when her mom died, and her mother who, and her father who actively fought for justice for her, and John O'Keefe's family. The corrupt, like when you see that kind of corruption and it comes out in a trial like that, it not only is it's hard for, Karen Reed and for, the people involved, but for those families that, they're back to square one. Like, exactly. What is going to happen? Like, it's just so sad.
The nightmare is not over for them. And even worse, they might now be internalizing some thoughts of like, we had hated and blamed this person for so long, and now it might not have been them, and who was it, and do we have to now go through this all over again? And if it was someone they knew or someone that was involved in the investigation, that's going to generate a whole new bag of emotions when it comes up that those people were not acting in accordance with their office. So there's so many losers when people do not act appropriately when they're part of the judicial system. And I think that's what's important. Not only did the taxpayers lose, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to have these trials. Justice is delayed for a lot of other people who aren't high profile. Their cases get pushed back so that the courts have time and, space to accommodate the media and everything. And, the victims' families and the people that are potentially being falsely accused of these crimes. So we really do have to get it right. And I think, every American citizen wants to be able to go to sleep at night and not worry that they could, a la Karen Reed. She had a fight with her boyfriend. She drove home. And then the next thing, the police are at her door saying she murdered him.
Right.
That is everyone's nightmare of what could happen to them. So I think we all need to spend a moment thinking, what if that was me? What if I now had to go through my entire life savings, quit my job, move somewhere so I don't have people at my house every single day? Your entire life is over as you know it. And how do you pick up and move on from that? And I mean, it's truly like powerful to think like how many ripples go into effect just from a group of people's actions.
Yeah. I mean, I do see, like this decision by Judge Young, I do see movement towards change for the better. I did the Supreme Court hearing Alex Murdaugh's case, the jury finding Karen Reed not guilty and everything but the OUI. And I saw one attorney tweeted the most expensive OUI prosecution in history, and it cracked me up. I mean, but it's true. I mean, do you think there need to be changes in how prosecutors, solicitors are trained, how investigators, sled the oversight of the investigators? Are there things that we can do systemically to prevent this?
I think it's such a hard thing. I actually clerked in the 13th Circuit Prosecutor's Office when I was in law school, and I worked on several of the high profile cases. And so I know that a lot of times their feelings are, we've got the right guy. We just have to prove it, right? And they want to make sure that they get the right guy. Most of them are good humans, and they do want to find, the answer to what happened. But sometimes the steps that they take to find that, they take a little cheat here and a little cheat there, and now the prosecutor can't do their job effectively because you've just given the defense a loaded gun, to fire back at them. So I know that these police officers, the majority of them absolutely want to do good and want to do great things at their job. The training to resist the urge to cheat just a little bit, I think that needs to be constantly reinstated. And I also think that, for the most part, the Attorney General's office is filled with prosecutors that exhibit nothing but professionalism and decorum and are passionate about their jobs and take them very seriously. I think some maybe buildup of continuing to foster how important that is. And, especially among the judiciary, and how respect of our judiciary is like the cornerstone of every lawyer's oath. So I think that could always be helpful to have a refresher. But I think really the police officers need to be constantly reminded that they're doing a good job. We just have to follow these rules because the protections are here in place for a reason, and every person is guaranteed those. So any jumps or cheats are just making it longer and harder in the long run. I used to say when I would prosecute defense cases, my dad would ask me, how could you represent this person, if you think that they did the crime? And my answer would always be, look, if I do my job effectively, then there are no appeals. The prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and they get the conviction that they earned because they proved it. And it's allowed the system to continue to flow. When you don't have those flows, then you have issues that come up with evidence, you have appeals issues, and it slows the entire system down, which is more costly. Less cases can get through in a year, and we get a backlog. So, which means more criminals on the street, which is what no one wants.
Right. Right. So I think it was absolutely an interesting week to watch court cases. And I think for people that are interested in that, in watching this, I think it was eye-opening. I think people saw, a little bit behind the scenes what happens going into a trial, and why this evidence matters, why the integrity and honesty of investigators and prosecutors is of utmost importance. And also, like you said, respect of the judiciary, which I don't know, we saw a lot of that from the lead prosecutor. I was like, what is happening? I mean, even the court staff, they were all like, whoo.
I think everyone like collectively like clenched.
I was like, well, this is awkward. I'm in a courtroom and I'm like sitting up straight. And I'm like, oh.
Like looking around. Yeah.
I really appreciate you joining me and giving me your insight on this. It has been super helpful. And I look forward to talking to you again, because I am sure we are going to have more wild cases to talk about. And definitely.
Yeah, we have Brian Kohlberger coming up here. I think it starts in like 10 weeks. So that one is going to be really juicy. So, and we haven't gotten a lot of evidence out on that one. So I'm excited to see, because we've had a gag order in place. So I'm really excited not excited. I'm looking forward to see how that case develops and what evidence the prosecution has.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Lauren.
All right, Jen, of course. Enjoy your week.
You too.